Hey guys, back again with another episode of Chop It Up. I'm Juan Escobar. This is my friend Austin James,
In the
and
flesh.
today we bring you Chapter 2 of Renovations of the Heart. Um, so in this chapter, Dallas Willard he presents this idea that there's six dimensions to humanity, and he kind of breaks those down and kind of, well, he doesn't kind of, he just kind of, I don't know, I'm saying kind of, but
Can't
um,
stop now. You're stuck.
yeah,
Just
I'm saying
kidding.
kind of. He kind of teaches how
He kind
God
of is.
affects each of those dimensions, but yeah, so we'll just break it down for y'all and give our thoughts on what we kind of just saw through that. So, um, in the beginning of the chapter, he brings in this idea that to be able to care for something, you need to understand it. And I thought that was really interesting, just because, uh, my profession is landscaping, so kind of this gardening kind of theme kind of helped me connect with this. And so, you know, as you're taking care of plants, the more you know about it, you're able to identify the problems and even just identify the timing of maintenance and whether it's needed or not. So I thought that was really interesting, kind of this idea that he would then apply for the human self, right? So I think he starts off with the heart. And so kind of just going on with that idea of understanding or being able to care for something needs understanding. Austin, I got a question for you. How do you think, or how important is it to be introspective in order to understand what's in the heart?
Yeah. It's kind of like you're saying with plants is that I was thinking too, is that you have to understand who you are to understand what you lack. So you don't know what a blind spot is until you realize that it's been an area you've never focused on.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think that's a big thing to do, is to really understand where your weak points are. Because I was going to note, because you're kind of more drawn on the weaknesses with plants, but also to understand how you're wired
Yeah.
is just like even going to the gym, about what to strengthen in. Once you understand how to lift, what parts of the body it'll affect, what exercises amplify certain muscles in your body. Once you understand who you are, you'll also understand how God wants to use you, or how He designed you to be used in the world. And so,
That's
once you have that dynamic of, this is what I'm going to focus on, but here's some things I need to be on the lookout for. That's why it's so good. And even too, what it does too is, when you understand, also back on the weak points, when you understand where you're weak, you also then know where to look for people who are strong in those areas that you're weak, and they
right.
now have more
That's
value
good.
in their lives, about how they can now team up with you in something that is not even like, you can even say weakness, but something that is not your favorite thing to do. But if it may be even someone really enjoys it, or they're just really good at it. It can be something that they have purpose in your life to help you out with. But that's why I found it's just good to understand what's under the hood, the wiring, the design. It helps you relate with other people.
Yeah.
It's very good to be able to care for yourself if you know what you're dealing with.
Yeah. One more thing I'd add on to that is like, even just the way I think I like to know the definition of things. So even like standards of like, um, so like with a plant, right? Like, what is a healthy plant? Like, what is the ideal um, healthy plant look like? And so kind of bringing that over into like just the human self, I think that's even just how I kind of seek that standard, even just, I know to pursue excellence, like in the ambitions that I have, I like to know like, hey, what's being great? Like, what is excellence at that level? And so, um, in a spiritual sense as well, I think I've always kind of liked to know, hey, what is God's standard on righteousness? What does it actually look like to be righteous?
Mm,
Or
yeah.
um, I think even recently, um, I think I had my own like preconceived idea of what wickedness is. So maybe in that ambition or just even me being critical of myself, maybe I may have even been too extreme on what wickedness is. So maybe I even like place like unreasonable standards of wickedness on myself. And so I had to go then and look at, well, hey, like, what does God's word say on what wickedness is? So that then helped me to kind of just even just understand the benchmarks. I guess that's how I would put it, is the benchmarks on certain definitions. So yeah, I think that's something important, and I'm glad that Dallas Willard pointed that out. Understanding is the basis for care. So as we had mentioned, he did describe 6 dimensions, and we're going to kind of go in that because in the book, he gives a couple diagrams on just how these dimensions work. And so this first one that he wrote, I'd show it to you on the screen, but it'd probably come up blurry. But pretty much what we have here is a concentric circle where there's 5 of them that builds off of what the spirit and heart will, or the spirit is. And so as I go through them, Austin will kind of just give some input on what he thinks on each one.
And you can show them a little bit. Yeah, just give the intro content. Just if it's grainy, just so there's a little bit of an idea.
Goes up real quick. Let's see, get the lighting right. There you go. It's coming into focus. So.
Yeah, because that's what I say. Even though they can't see the detail letter, just to be able to see it a little bit, I think is good. Yeah,
that's right. So hopefully you got a little glimpse there of what I'm talking about. And so that center circle there, he calls it the spirit, which is made up of the heart and will. So what can you explain about that, Austin, for us?
Yeah, so the term I was liking, as we were discussing this beforehand, is kind of saying that's like your decision center, that's your pilot of your ship, of like, what are you actually going to do?
And then the next one that follows that would be the mind, which is composed of thoughts and feelings.
Yeah, so 2 different ones of like, so keeping with my first, my only thought I had about spirit, about being the pilot, is I thought of thoughts and feelings as kind of the crew and the staff of the ship, that they're your different thoughts, and then how you feel about your thoughts. That's what he gets into as well, is that the mind is composed of thoughts and feelings, and that they're interdependent on each other. That you're going to have a belief about something, but you're also going to feel a certain level of intimacy towards that belief, whether pain or pleasure. But I saw it also too as not only just being the crew members of your pilot, of your spirit, but also what rotates the spirit is almost like a halo, in that a thought, all thinking is circular. So how a thought pattern makes a circle that then becomes the launch pad by which you make decisions. So that's how I also like seeing how your mind and your spirit kind of like go together, that you need to have these thoughts and feelings you have about values, about realities of life, and that's by which you make decisions. So yeah, mind and spirit are pretty interwoven in my belief. So that's why I made the pilot and the ship crew analogy pretty synonymous, and even the halo making a circle that then becomes a launch pad. I kind of 2 analogies for that.
Yeah, that's pretty helpful. And so after spirit and mind, body comes next.
Yeah, so with the body, kind of forgetting my biggest things for that, but just kind of seeing how, I think this is where I thought too, this is the way to see what I was talking about earlier, about feeling, about pleasure and pain dynamic, that this is kind of your physical representation that you're going to kind of see in the world. I like too that he gives an analogy too about this is largely going to be part about the DNA by which you are given, that your physical representation of God's nature is going to be, it's derived from the literal lineage of who is your mom and who is your dad, and that this is an aspect of just through the genetic lottery of whatever got cranked out with their two genetics mixing together births you, but you are the literal physical image of the invisible God at that point. But that's another aspect of your humanity, of what do you actually look like.
Right. And did he say something about like it's also kind of just like the vessel with which the inner world is able to now make a physical manifestation?
He says something, that's his open sense. I'm looking right here. It says that it's the focal point of our presence in the physical and social world.
Right. Yeah. So that's kind of more the definition I was thinking of.
Yeah.
Body, but yeah. Okay. And then the next one would be social.
Yeah. So another word you could use for social, I think fits it, that we more think of quicker than social, is culture. Yeah. And so I like that he put a very interesting description towards American culture, that we're a culture based on rejection. Mm. So I thought that was a very interesting way to describe the kind of culture that we're specifically in this country, that you could even see it in the first, I guess, first half of the last century was based on a systematic kind of oppression towards the minority groups of this country. And the second half was more tilting the scales to realizing how all those minority groups got rejected, and now the rejection is now being launched towards any person that would reject anything. So it went from one ditch of rejection to then being against rejection in any type of format. So it's kind of the word for that too you hear is tolerance. We're going to tolerate anything but intolerance. We will not tolerate intolerance. We can't handle that. Or even classifying people as intolerant that are simply disagreeing. But this is an aspect of culture. This is an aspect of one of the weirdest cultures in the world, of America being this melting pot of every culture. So it makes sense. At one point, we were one extreme of how we rejected, and now we're on the other extreme where we just don't reject anybody. But I guess that's where you get into a culture of cultures. That's what you can call America. So we're in a very interesting dynamic, is that I definitely represented that with being a white dude, of like just being a mutt. I'm a mixture of cultures, but that's what I love about you, Juan, and what I try to highlight and always encouraging that is that you have a specific name to your culture. El Salvadorian. I like that. Like you have roots, and there's definite stances that your culture takes on things that really value. My families definitely do. Yeah. Like I said, my mom's side does have German influence in it, and definitely with my dad's side being James, there's English influence, but there's just a mixture of other Anglo-Saxon countries that are in it. So that's why I say mutt. And that's kind of the typical white American, that they don't even understand what culture is, because we're in this culture of cultures of America. But that's another aspect of our humanity.
Yeah. Sure. And so the last circle would be soul.
Mm-hmm. So yeah, you said it best when that synonymous with soul, just like where social could be synonymous with culture, soul can be also synonymous with identity. This is the bow. This is all these concentric circles. The soul is the package of everything that makes you, you. And so that's the best way to say it. Even me call myself white boy. If that was literally how I saw myself, then that would be an identity statement. And then however I define that statement, that would be the essence of who I viewed myself to be. And then that would be the essence of my spirit, the decisions I would make through my heart, my volition. Those would be the thoughts that I have. I'm a white boy. I'd feel a certain way about that. That's how I would do certain things with my body, how I'd feel about it, what I would do with it, would I put tattoos on it, would I put piercings, would I lift a lot, would I run a lot, what would I do, would I have a certain degree to my diet. But I feel the soul gives you the final kind of conclusion about what are you going to be about, what is going to be your identifying factor. So that's why I really like, you had said earlier, identity is a way to see what the soul is, and that's the final layer of the concentric circle of humanity.
That's right. And then he did have another diagram he talked about, and this one was different in that it described um, the ways we interacted with God. And so the first one being, and they're both kind of in the same, except they contrasted each other in the way, I guess, um, with, because it was a list, right? It was a list of different, what'd you call it? The dimensions. There's a list of the dimensions and the order in which, I guess, the hierarchy of how the lower dimension would serve the other. And so, in the life away from God, um, God was at the bottom, right? And so the person would expect God to serve his spirit, and then the spirit would then serve the mind, and then the mind would serve the soul, and then the soul would have then served the body, and the body having the most importance in the life away from God. And so then to contrast that, in the life under God, the body takes, I guess, the least amount of importance. And so the body would now, in turn, serve the soul, and then the soul would serve the mind, and then the mind would serve the spirit, and then the spirit would now serve God. So a very 180-degree kind of interaction where God was at the highest for life under God, and then the body would be the highest for life away from God. So any thoughts on that? Awesome.
Yeah, so two different kind of different analogies with how someone could be described in a life away from God, how these different hierarchies, these orders of dominance could look like in their life. Essentially, I kind of described one too when I was given my further commentary on the white boy analogy, but the
Okay.
specific one I had for life away from God is seeing as the body is the highest order of dominance in the life away from God. And if God is the kind of the genie, the serving factor in that, I thought of someone that is diagnosed with anorexia, body dysmorphic disorder,
Mm-hmm.
that at that point they could believe if they didn't have a relationship with God, that God was there to serve them and them trying to form their image of him into the way they wanted that to look. And we could say that there's a mental illness that's distorting that. They actually in reality look a certain way, but their mental projection of themselves is distorted. And so that definitely would get amplified to a very unhealthy degree if they didn't believe they are the visible image of the invisible God that their mental illness could just fully control. So God would then be someone that would help them to further lose weight because they see this bigger person in the mirror than what's actually there. And from that, that's going to lead to decisions of what we first think of with they're going to starve themselves. So they're going to make these spirit-filled decisions with their will. They're going to volitionally not eat food.
Yeah.
And from that, if they think they're through this mental illness, their mind, their thoughts, and their feelings, they're probably going to have very self-condemning, anxious, depressing feelings about their body. And they're probably going to have a lot of negative statements to say to people about themselves and to themselves, that they're ugly, that they're fat, that they're undesirable, that these are going to be thoughts. So again, that halo, like I was talking about, these are thoughts that are going to circle around like this broken, corrupted record that's going to be a launching pad to continue to starve themselves. And they're going to feel terrible about that. So with that, the second to last degree of the soul, they're having these thoughts and feelings, the mind, then gets to the soul, where they're then going to have this identity statement: I'm fat, or I am pathetic, I'm undesirable. This identity statement of like, they're going to be like, I'm an anorexic, I have this mental disorder. It's like, no, they're just going to live out those traits. But the true identity statement is going to be, I'm undesirable. That'd probably be the biggest thing for someone that's ever struggled with that. And if someone has, that'd be interesting to hear.
Yeah, that would
Certainly
be interesting.
their personal testimony of identity statements they'd say. But I imagine it would sound something like that. I can definitely
maybe.
be
We don't know.
comfortable. And it leads to, like Juan was saying, that the God of the order of dominance in a life away from God is the body. So again, that's why all these things are leading to, I want to perfect my image that I feel has been corrupted. So all these things are meant, because I see this conflated image in the mirror, is to starve myself to a thinner, more perfectible image that will be desirable to me. So it's
Right.
not about looking desirable in God's eyes, but desirable in my own eyes.
Yeah.
So that's what I kind of see my analogy of the anorexic, what that could possibly look like in the life away from God. But the life under God kind of gives this oxymoronic statement we see in Romans 12:1 about offering our bodies as a living sacrifice. So the bottom of the totem pole, one was described as that the body's at the bottom of the totem pole, living sacrifice. And then with that, there's going to be this identity of that term I just said, capital L, capital S, capital L living, capital S sacrifice, living sacrifice. That's my identity. This is who I am. I'm offering my body as a living sacrifice, holy and pleasing to God. And from that, I'm going to say a thought like I know that reference, Romans 12:1, that this is my thought. And I further want to submit my feelings, my intimacy toward my thought of saying, this is who I am. I'm all these analogies. I am a drink offering to this world. I pour my life out to this world. I am the bread of life that I give life to others. I bear the fruit of salvation by which other people can eat from me and experience salvation, the joy of the Lord in their lives based on how I live my life, because it's a life of sacrifice and giving. But these thoughts and feelings of just falling more and more in love of this is who I am. And so through that those thoughts, again, the halo analogy creates a launching pad for the next order of dominance to spiritually live out your faith volitionally. If I believe this about myself, that's the whole big thing too, about believing you are this living sacrifice and then living it out. And then lastly, the order of dominance be that God is the hierarchy, that he
Right.
is the standard and he is the basis by which all these other things are falling under submission. But that's what I'd see is I like those two different analogies of away from God, kind of what the anorexic would, how they'd gear their entire life, their thoughts, their feelings. But then the person who identifies as a Christian says, I'm a living sacrifice under submission of God.
Yeah. That's good. I think that gives a good explanation on these diagrams. So in the book, there's this sentence or point that he puts out, and I really liked it because I kind of feel like I experienced that growing up and probably even here recently too. So it says, in the ruined soul, the mind becomes a fearful wilderness and a wild intermixture of thought and feeling, manifested in willful stupidities, blatant inconsistencies, and confusions, often to the point of obsession, madness, or possession. So I think the thing that sticks out to me is like going back to how I was telling you, like the benchmarks for me, right? Like, so here is a definition of what a ruined soul looks like. And so I know growing up for me, I guess I observed a lot, kind of just, and when it came down to, there's the external world, but I kind of just had church as well, kind of separate. And so when it came to like the church world, which is kind of where I compartmentalized spiritual stuff, was like, all right, I'm going to be more spiritual at church. I just felt like there was, from my observation, just things that confused me, and it was just teaching me on how to go about how to approach life, right? And so, and then school and the world was teaching me, hey, like this is reality and this is how things work. And so I just felt a lot of confusion, and so I just felt really conflicted on just how to approach life. And just I can really relate to just feeling like I was in a wilderness and just kind of wrestling with my thoughts and my feelings. And so I think that as I learned new things, even going into college, I think that always was a hindrance for me, and I can say even I think like at a personal level, like maybe just affected me just pursuing maybe some relationships with women. I think that there was always like this hesitance because of some conflicting thoughts or feelings, or both, right? Like a feeling that would conflict with some thoughts that I had. And so I could say, yeah, man, like there were points where like it literally felt like hell, just having to wrestle with all that. So I don't know. I really appreciate that. Dallas kind of gives a little description here of what the ruined soul looks like, because at the end of the day, right, like I think the mind kind of does encapsulate, just the inner world and whatever beliefs we can have because of our thoughts, and then just as he put it too, like the feelings dictate, how we receive those thoughts or perceive those thoughts, and then, whether we find pleasure in them or pain, and according to whatever feelings we're feeling, we'll approach those thoughts accordingly. So yeah, that makes me ask you a question now. Like, have you ever experienced anything like that yourself?
Yeah, I feel like I'm on the opposite end of the spectrum of that.
Okay.
I like that. It doesn't really fit my story too well, but I just like I feel it's been in other areas of my life that when I believe lies that it manifests in willful stupidities and blatant inconsistencies. I like that phrasing, that, just willful and it's blatant, the inconsistencies, but
Yeah.
because there's a belief in the lie,
That's right.
it leads to that. Cause that's why I feel like yours is like this over anxious zeal to perform.
Yeah.
Mine was this belief that there was no hope for holiness. So it was even just the ignorance of what holiness could look like. It was just a submission to fear and just a desire for comfort, that I just lived in other people's shadows. I let other people lead out on going on grand adventures and experiencing things about life. And to the degree I followed along with them. So it was comfortable for me that I didn't have to bear the brunt of any failures. So I could just go live someone else's journey and get the experience, the tailwind of what we did, how we interacted, and what it went about. But what it did was just foster kind of a hatred for myself and just a fear to fail,
Okay.
and a fear to try new things, and a fear to really even prioritize my desires, my things that I enjoy. I never thought I'd get to the point like I've talked about where I write the poetry that I did, because it's something that I always told myself that I just wasn't creative. I've heard you say the same things. And
Yeah.
that's what
Yeah.
I did.
Right there too.
There's just
Yeah.
this tremendous fear. I mean, it brought out the worst of me as you were diagnosed with my personality type, that the kind of the demon of mine is to really is the inward creativity, really even try to challenge myself or even try to find that self in me. That's like my deepest fear, is to find that. And I've seen that manifest in my life too, because there's just this fear of not be able to generate anything, not be able to entertain anybody, not be able to provoke any thought. And so with that, all those fears, they don't just paralyze me. So yours was a life of trying to prove yourself and try to make it and try to get there.
That's right.
Mine was stopping before I even started.
Mm-hmm.
This fear of the unknown, and just completely getting paralyzed in my fear on the other spectrum.
Yeah. So going back to that thought of mine of just like thoughts and feelings, I think it's pretty important, right? Like just to, how we talked about earlier at the beginning, understand those, right? Understand our thoughts and feelings.
Yeah.
And so I think that we explained a little more here. I think even just like realizing the beliefs we believe, like maybe we have some limiting beliefs like you described, and being able to identify those are so important, because then that even just I don't know, I wouldn't go and say like it inspires the feelings we feel, right? Like, I mean, if it's negative, I feel like we would have, if they're negative beliefs, we would have a bunch of negative feelings that have to do with that. And I guess maybe on your end, it'd be more like, since you desire comfort, you'd be seeking more pleasure type feelings. And so, but I don't know. Yeah. What do you think? How important do you think it is to kind of just um, focus those feelings and I guess to even make it more spiritual, like they should be focused on God, right?
Yeah.
Because ultimately God is the one who has truth, can speak into those thoughts, can actually because I guess at the end of the day, if all our dimensions are balanced, we're going to be healthy, right? And so I think that as well, like God's going to bring health into our thoughts and feelings. So uh,
Oh yeah.
yeah, how important do you think that is to have it focused on God?
I was just thinking, if he truly is the origin of life, then I was thinking to those adjectives I was saying earlier about willful stupidity. So if it's centered around my thoughts and feelings are centered around him, then there's going to be willful balance, like you had said earlier. There's going to be a proper order to the things that I pursue and how I go about that. If he's the center of everything I do, and then that next statement I'd said about blatant inconsistencies. And if my thoughts revolve around him, then all my thoughts now are going to be logically consistent. So I
That's
just
right.
love that balance, that I'm not putting my brain on a shelf and no longer using it. It's like, no, I'm probably more logical than I've ever been in my life when it's revolved around God. And that's definitely reigned true when I've kept my mind meditating on the thoughts, on the realities of God's nature. And then also that's led me to be properly reminiscent of the past, to be able to appreciate it, fully present in the moment, and then truly hopeful in the future. And
Yeah,
that's what I'd say. That's a willful balance of being able to, because that's who God is going to be praised for in eternity. Is that holy, holy, holy is the God Almighty, is the Lord Almighty, who was and is to come.
yeah,
So he's praised all throughout human history of what he was, of being the God. He was the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. He currently is our God. In the next generations that inhabit this planet, he will be their God. It's going to happen.
right. Yeah, no, I like that. I like those thoughts. And so I think kind of even like to build on that too, I think it's maybe it's probably just as important to kind of be attentive to what I think we're even receiving on at an external level, right? Like in our external environment, because not only is our we got the inner will with our thoughts and mind and will and but we also have our body, right? We have the social context in which we're interacting with the world, and so um, I think a lot of times maybe that's more um, what's the word I want to use? I think it's just more. It's harder for me to pay attention because I'm more paying attention to what's going on in my mind. Like I pay attention more to my thoughts and probably my feelings. So I'm not as attentive to how maybe the way I'm going about in the world and interacting and just the culture's influencing me. My job's influencing me, and how that even affects or as they say these days, triggers, my mind or my thoughts and feelings. And so
Mhm.
I think also too that's it's very important to identify what's coming in, right? Because then that affects the heart, that affects the mind. And so I think uh, I want to say we can control that, but then again, I know we
Mhm.
can't all the time, but how
Yeah.
important do you think um, I guess let me rephrase it. How important do you see, um, those external influences, um, and how does that affect what's going on in our heart, or I identify how
Yeah.
that's affecting our heart?
Oh, for sure. Yeah. Now this is where the word discernment, has meaning, is what
Yeah,
we're describing right here. Even just the phrase having eyes to see, like
okay.
really what is the origin of what's coming? Because if this is something from the darkness, if this is something evil, if we can see it for what it really is, because we know Satan can masquerade as an angel of light. That's usually how we fall for things that are very devious and destructive to our nature. Is on the surface, it can have appeal. It can be something that we value, that, the lie is kind of wrapped around some truths that we admire, that we're drawn towards, but maybe we have a little bit too much affection for than we should, kind of an overbalance than other qualities in our life. And I think that's even the key, is that if we don't see these things, that things will get unbalanced in our life, and that's what leads to destructive things in our life and in the lives of the people that we associate with. But yeah, that's why it's just so important. We always have to stay vigilant and really assess, what did I just come into agreement with? What did I just start thinking?
Exactly.
What is its basis? What is it trying to tell me? What is this thought getting me to do? I think that's important too. I'd say that whole thing that the thought makes the halo, and it launches forth an action. It creates a circle that becomes a launch pad by how you live your life. So that's why it's so important to see, what is this thought creating? What is it having me do? And really asking those questions.
Yeah. And so I think I said it earlier, right? Like, talking about control, right? I think that goes, maybe it's like a reflection of my past, I guess, legalistic tendencies to want to be able to like control or maybe achieve my own righteous actions or whatever. But I think that leads into my next question, is that do you think grace from God slows down the impatience that self-achieved righteousness brings? Because I mean, that's essentially what I'm saying, right? Is like, hopefully that through my control of my external environments, and what that information is bringing into my heart, hopefully I can have the control to, discern what's right on my own understanding, my own wisdom, and then influence how that now outflows and takes off, like you were saying, into my actions.
Yeah, I thought initially grace would just slow down, but I think what it does is it brings in the proper timing and pace by which God operates through reality. Like,
Okay.
really what his beat, his frequency, as the New Agers like to zone into, but what really the tempo he goes about creating, and how his nature really what the enjoyment of his nature looks like in balance. So I was thinking too, the key word for that, what you described to about what needs to be slowed down, is self. You said self-achieved righteousness, but as we kind of discussed earlier, your self led to zealousness and a lot of effort. My self-condemning led to getting sedated and not doing anything. So that's what I'm saying, is like, we're initially thinking of your kind of active participant of self-achieving, but we didn't think about self-achieving towards comfort that's going to lead to little to nothing as far as achievements. But grace at that point wakes up the sleeper. It wakes up the sloth in me, but it also grabs you by the shirt collar and says, let's slow down, young fella.
Yeah.
We're going at this a little too much. That anxiety, this depression, anger, this bitterness you hold in yourself. Let's get on with this. But it also says, hey man, you being way too hard on yourself. And that's what I found too. It really, God used other people condemning themselves to really break my heart. Because I'd hear people speak such just death over themselves.
Gotcha.
And I'd be like, oh, is that what I sound like when I do that? Because I know I just say it and just kind of it's just like nothing. But when I hear other people, the few times I've heard other people be like really hard on themselves, it really put things into perspective. And so as I say, that's me kind of being in just such this zombie mode of being so used to speaking death over myself, that I feel grace awakens true humility. And my slight pet peeve I brought up about humility is that I think a lot of the church sees humility as modesty. I think that's why we should always be so precise in our wording, is that we think to be humble means to just, have a lesser view of yourself, in a sense, be self-condemning. And that's what
Yeah,
you'll
yeah,
see.
I agree.
People
Yeah.
represent
On that.
humility as
Yeah.
self-depreciating. So
Yeah.
that's why I didn't want to solely focus on and how your self-achievement manifests in performing. And so it's going to slow you down. But I
Yeah.
think it gets people to be much more positive. It speeds people up. It makes people more lively and passionate. Because the thing about the self-depreciating person too, they tend not to be as passionate and zealous. They tend to be well-versed and very articulate in how they describe themselves. But there seems to be this dark cloud of just pessimism about them, negativity. And that's why I say awake. It kind of livens their spirit. It makes them more impassioned. It brings more of a joy to their lives, because I think like I said, they fell into that lie that humility has to means self-depreciation. It means modesty. The way
Right.
I define humility, it doesn't even have to be that, but the way I've come to understand humility is just an accurate view of yourself. And that's
Okay.
what I love. Grace balances both ends of the spectrum of how we've kind of seen ourselves be lived out. We're similar in some regards, but in other regards, we're on opposite ends. The
Yeah.
one dynamic for us is we're both intense in whatever lane we happen to fall
Right.
ourselves in. We're in
Yeah.
the grace, like the keyword kind of seems to be about this chapter about aspect of humanity. What God brings to the table is balance. So grace is definitely the key. It is the ingredient. It's God's graciousness that balances out a distorted humanity.
Yeah. I can see that. So he brings up another point on just how, or Dallas Willard does, on just how the world is kind of like confused, as he had talked earlier, right? And so I think he made a point how sometimes the church maybe doesn't even understand fully how these dimensions work. And so the lack of it, and even just maybe not knowing how scripture speaks into these dimensions, kind of causes this kind of confusion, um, I guess, within the church as well, and so I guess there's some imbalance between these dimensions. And so, and that affects the church. So how have you seen your Christian world bring about confusion around you?
Yeah, I think it also be as far as like church membership of like really probably the first lesson that should be taught when someone's a new member for the first time at church is Romans 14, understanding the concept of a strong and a weak faith. And even as I describe sometimes how I tell people I have a weak faith on something, they'll see
Okay.
that as self-depreciating. And so, to an extent, it kind of is, but it's
Yeah.
an accurate view of where I stand. It's honestly, when you say you have a weak faith, it's like we just talked about in the beginning of our discussion about understanding how you're wired. Like this
Yeah.
is not a strong point of mine, so it's not something I can do in liberation. So example of strong faith would be someone that can drink alcohol and not do it to the point where they get drunk.
Okay.
But the weak faith is going to be someone that they have a generational kind of curse of alcoholism in their family, or
Right.
they are an alcoholic. And so at that point, sobriety for them is complete abstinence from alcohol. And they know because of what they've struggled with, or even their preference, that if they even had if they had one drink, they'd go right back to an addictive cycle of behavior.
Mm.
I think that understanding of even understanding the concept of strong and weak faith would really help us understand each other a lot more about what it really looks like to encourage and challenge other members of the body. Because it's like, yeah, I could be weak at one point, and I desire your help on an issue that you're strong in, but that doesn't mean in a sense too you're my crutch. I think
Mm.
also if it is my weak point, I think yes, it'd be very loving of you to help me out in something that I request your help in. But I think also there should be kind of a challenging too, of that you help to kind of teach me why you love it so much, why you're so gifted in a certain area, to build me up stronger than when I initially asked you for help in something. So I see this category too about why we have such a hard time. We say, let's major in the majors, salvation, that it's by grace through faith. But then we say, we're going to minor in the minors, but because we don't know how to have these nuanced conversations sometimes, or even able to understand introspectively why we're so passionate on one issue and why we're so dead to another, and why this person, they hate what I love and they love what I hate, that kind of thing. But because of that, we end up turning a minor issue into a salvation issue. Age of the earth, sovereignty of God, head coverings, gender, anything. But
Right.
because someone doesn't share my conviction on a certain issue, then I don't even know if they're saved.
Yeah.
Do they
No,
have the,
dude.
so I see this cognitive dissonance where we say, this is what it means to be a Christian. Like, this is the basis. But then there becomes such this, and really it's a fleshly thing. It's a selfish thing. There's such this attachment to that. This is my conviction. This is how I feel about it, that it gets overblown on the other person, where there's not allowed to be, hey, I'm really passionate about this right now. Could you consider this? I think it's really hard to dial it down when we get very zealous. I think that's just human nature. We're zealous and we really want to get a point across, but there's kind of a focus on, this is how I feel right now. And it's not necessarily reminding, like, hey, maybe this other person might not feel the way I feel. Or, hey, they may not even understand what I'm saying. That's what I was saying too with Romans 14, where I gave an analogy for it. That's what I'm saying. They may not even understand the concept of strong faith versus weak faith. Because then not only do you have to understand the intellectual concept too, but what I was saying is you have to understand how to apply the concept. If I did that I understood that concept, but I was able to apply it to alcohol. But you also have to be able to apply it to every aspect of life of how that can happen. But that's what I feel is, like, I've seen that taught, but I've witnessed every single time a minor issue gets brought up, or not every time, but a lot of time, where it becomes these huge dramatic things that the church seemingly doesn't know how to talk about. And so, yeah, that throws me into a lot of confusion, that I hear the church saying one thing, but what I see experience is the complete opposite thing they said they wouldn't do. So it really breaks my heart, because,
Yeah, man. Yeah.
I'm all over the church as far as experiencing what the body has to offer. Because I'd say the body is composed of all strengths, but it's just
Yeah.
different parts of the body where when they're walking into a strength, that they tend to have a weakness, a critical weakness sometimes in another area. And Paul even told us, the foot shouldn't go to the foot to the hand and say, why are you not a foot? And the hand goes, why are you not a hand? But I see different parts of the body of Christ do that to each other. They cannibalize each other all the time. And
That's
so
right.
for me, because that's where my ministry is, that's where my heart, for me, it does throw me into a little confusion. Like, God, are you really the head of this body? Are people really doing that right now? Or are they making their specific passion and conviction God? So it's really convicting, and sometimes it can really confuse me how tribalistic the world is, tribalistic in how they think. I talked about it earlier about the first half of the last century looking a certain way, and the last half of the century as far as that topic of rejection, America. So it's really sad when I see the church do that as well, because we're not called to that at all. One spirit,
Yeah,
one
and
body.
so that's even been my experience as well, right? Like, I think, to give a couple specific examples, I know, um, you know, going back to my testimony, right? Like, the church I grew up in my teens, I think that, at that point I was just observing a lot, and just with it being a holiness church, we had all these minors, right, that we were making major things, and so uh me going with I guess what you call it, the status quo, right? Like, just going with how things are done, I was, I guess, not to sound that I was judging or whatnot, but I mean, I was observing, and I was hoping to see, because I was results oriented. I was like, all right, like, this is what we're preaching. Are our actions reflecting that? And so, like, seeing us fail at that, like, that was really confusing. And so, going back to the first, what was it? The ruined soul point. I think that caused a lot of confusion, even for myself, because I mean, what they were at an ideal level preaching was like, hey, you gotta be perfect, man. And so, like, this outward look needs to be flawless, and you need to see evidence of the Holy Spirit working in you, and so, like, that made me
It'd
just
be a
doubt.
dangerous phrase,
Yeah,
evident.
no, it is. And so, like, I think it's only right that my soul was ruined at that point, and there was just so much confusion during that time for me. And so, and going back to the reference of, just how they would like preach like abstinence and just say, can't have sex before marriage, like I think for me, not I think, but I know that when I heard that, it was like a challenge, right? And not like a challenge that, we hear nowadays in like Bible study, like, hey, I'm going to challenge you to do this. But it was more like the, hey, point a finger in your chest, like, don't do this kind of thing. And so for me, that was just like, yeah, it was the challenge, right? But then like what that brought in me was like resentment, because I thought, wow, like you don't trust that. First of all, I have God in me, right? Like the Holy Spirit should be in there. I might not be speaking in tongues or, being fervent in worship. And maybe I don't like, because I remember a lot, like if you were a loud preacher, like you would get so many more amens, and just like people really feeling the word of God when it was being preached. And so, maybe that isn't evidence to me, but I know like what God has done in me. And so the fact that you're doubting me right now, like it almost, I mean, like the flesh part of me is like, it's challenged, like, yes, now I will prove you wrong, but at the same time, that was only birthing resentment in my heart towards leaders and whatnot, and in the church probably. So, yeah, man, like I think that was a lot of confusion, just because, there's these good things that I'm thinking should be done, but we weren't following through, or I wasn't following through. And so that just led to confusion and a wilderness of, how Dallas Willard says, a wilderness of intermixture of those feelings and thoughts, man. So
that's a good statement. Yeah.
So, man, that's all I got, unless you got anything else.
I was just thinking a slight note of what you said too. I just realized to it that you trying to prove them wrong is kind of a condemnation mindset. When I was thinking about it, is that they had laid down this condemnation. You are not going to be able to do this. You are wrong. You are flawed. So then your resentment led to, no, you're wrong. I'm going to live a certain way to prove you wrong. But it was just this right versus wrong thinking, is that one party said you're wrong. Then it led to breeding, disciples that said, no, you're wrong. And there was no love. There was no peace. There was no joy.
Yeah.
So it was simply, I'm going to prove I'm right. You're wrong.
Sure.
I just realized when you make that the foundation of your teaching, that's the only you either have someone that says they can't do it and they become what they were.
Dude, that's right.
Say, I can't do this, so I will become the beast. I will become this sex crazed animal. Or if you develop what you just described, saying, no, I will do this, but the fuel wasn't out of a reverence for Christ. It was, no, you're wrong. I'm right. I can do this.
Cloaked behind like, hey, this is what God would want. And this
exactly. That's what you'd say on the surface, obviously. Yeah.
Like, this is a godly thing I'm doing, right? But
and that's why I think it's so key when we first talked about why it's so important for you to recognize that's what you did and that's what you would have been doing to this day had your mind not changed about grace, is that you would have said the right things. You wouldn't have said that was your motivation, but now being able to check your motivations and understand why you did the things back then, that was the real motivation behind your heart. And that's why the heart needs to be renovated.
That's right. Amen. So that's perfect, man. I think that's a perfect way to close this off. And
Spirit-led, bro.
That's right.
Can't tie a bow that well.
What's up?
I was saying I just can't tie a bow that well unless it's spirit.
Yeah. No, that was great. That was a great.
Wrapping in the title.
Yeah, appreciate it. To our audience, we will bring you back chapter 3 next time around. We'll be talking more about the ruined soul, so this will be a good topic to keep going on. And so, if you liked this video, give us a thumbs up. Leave a comment in the sections. We do want to have discussions about this. If you need us to clarify anything, or you thought of a question, just present it to us, and we'll do our best to answer back. And subscribe to the channel if you're new. More content to come. And again, as always, thanks for watching. Juan Escobar, it's my bro Austin James, and this is it for today. Thanks for watching.